Neoliberalism has meant, in short, the financialization of everything. David Harvey's A Brief History of Neoliberalism explains how neoliberalism emerged as the dominant economic policy from the late 20th century onwards. Harvey defines neoliberalism as a political and economic paradigm that prioritizes market-led growth, deregulation, and privatization. It argues that human well-being is best achieved through the free operation of markets, which supposedly leads to the most efficient allocation of resources. Harvey traces neoliberalism's roots back to the late 1970s and early 1980s, noting significant political changes in the United States and the United Kingdom. Governments of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher are identified as pivotal in advancing neoliberal policies. These leaders implemented sweeping reforms that reduced state intervention in the economy, deregulated industries, cut taxes, and weakened labour unions. State intervention is where the government plays a big role in the economy, helping to manage things like jobs, industries, and prices to keep everything stable and fair. The system worked well for a while, but hit a rough patch in the 1970s when the global economy started to struggle after the US dropped the system in 1971. Leaders and experts purported that the government was actually part of the problem and started to believe that if the government stepped back and let businesses and markets be free to run things on their own, everything would work better. Harvey explains that neoliberalism was initially a response to the economic crises of the 1970s, characterized by stagflation, a combination of stagnant economic growth and high inflation, and a perceived failure of Keynesian economic policies. Keynesianism, which advocated for state intervention in the economy to smooth out the business cycle and promote full employment, seemed unable to address the economic turmoil of the time. In contrast, neoliberalism proposed that free markets, deregulation, and reduced government spending would lead to more efficient and dynamic economic outcomes. But what is neoliberalism? It can be generally summed up by the following four macro policies: privatization, deregulation, liberalization, and individualism. Privatization. Neoliberalism advocates for the transfer of public services and assets into private hands, arguing that the private sector is more efficient. This has led to the privatization of essential services like water, electricity, education, and healthcare. Publicly held revenue-generating assets and key industries are also sold off to private investors at fire sale prices. Deregulation. Neoliberalism calls for the removal of government regulations that are seen as impediments to economic activity. This includes financial deregulation, which has allowed for the expansion of speculative activities and contributed to financial instability. Liberalization or marketization. The extension of market principles to all areas of life is a core tenet of neoliberalism. This means that even non-economic spheres, such as education and health, are subjected to market logic, where competition and profit motives drive decision-making. Individualism. Neoliberalism emphasizes individual, entrepreneurial freedoms and responsibilities. It posits that individuals are responsible for their own success or failure, which can obscure the structural inequalities and social factors that shape opportunities. Harvey critically examines the widespread impacts of neoliberal policies on global societies. Inequality. One of the most significant outcomes of neoliberalism has been the increase in income and wealth inequality. Harvey notes that neoliberal policies have disproportionately benefited the wealthy and corporations. Meanwhile, the working class and marginalised communities have faced wage stagnation, job insecurity, and reduced access to public services. For example, in the United States, the top 1% of earners saw their share of national income grow from 8% in 1980 to over 20% by 2007. Financial crises. Deregulation of the financial sector has led to increased financial instability and speculative bubbles. Harvey highlights the 2008 financial crisis as a direct result of neoliberal policies which exposed the vulnerabilities and excesses of an unregulated financial system. The global financial crisis of 2008 led to a 5.1% contraction in global GDP and a $2.4 trillion loss in the global banking sector. Erosion of democracy. Neoliberalism has shifted power away from democratic institutions to unelected bodies, such as central banks and international organizations like the IMF and WTO. This has undermined democratic accountability and allowed corporate interests to wield significant influence over public policy. Globalization. Neoliberalism has facilitated the globalization of capital, leading to the outsourcing of jobs and the exploitation of labor in developing countries. Harvey argues that this has created a race to the bottom in terms of wages and labor conditions as countries compete to attract foreign investment. Between 1980 and 2000, the share of global income going to labor declined from 65% to 58%. Harvey's critique extends to various dimensions of neoliberalism's impact. Economic restructuring. Neoliberalism has restructured economies worldwide, emphasizing financial markets over productive industries. This shift has made economies more vulnerable to financial crises and speculative bubbles. The prioritization of shareholder value has often come at the expense of long-term investments in innovation and infrastructure, leading to economic volatility and stagnating development. Social fragmentation. By promoting individualism and competition, neoliberalism has weakened social solidarity and community bonds. Public services, once seen as social goods, have been transformed into commodities, accessible only to those who can afford them. This has led to increased social stratification and a decline in the quality of life for many. Environmental degradation. Neoliberal policies often prioritize short-term economic gains over environmental sustainability. Deregulation has allowed for the exploitation of natural resources without adequate safeguards, leading to environmental degradation and contributing to climate change. Harvey argues that the pursuit of profit under neoliberalism often disregards the ecological costs, exacerbating environmental crises. For instance, between 1980 and 2006, carbon dioxide emissions increased by 35%, largely due to deregulated industrial activities. Harvey also examines how neoliberalism has reshaped political power. He shows neoliberalism has centralized power in the hands of a global elite. International organizations and multinational corporations wield significant influence over national policies, often prioritizing their interests over those of local populations. This centralization undermines national sovereignty and democratic processes. Also, how the influence of corporate lobbying has increased under neoliberalism, shaping public policies to favor business interests. This has led to the erosion of regulatory frameworks designed to protect workers, consumers, and the environment. Harvey highlights how the revolving door between government and corporate sectors perpetuates policies that favor the wealthy. Neoliberalism often prescribes austerity measures in response to economic crises that its implementation creates. These measures typically involve cuts to public spending, social services, and welfare programs. Harvey argues that austerity disproportionately affects the poor and marginalized, exacerbating social inequalities and undermining economic recovery. For instance, austerity measures in Greece post-2008 crisis led to a 25% reduction in GDP and unemployment rates soaring to over 27%. Harvey's analysis is grounded in a Marxist perspective, which sees neoliberalism as a tool for restoring class power to the elite 1% class. He argues that neoliberal policies have been designed to reassert the dominance of the capitalist class by dismantling the welfare state, weakening labour movements, and redistributing wealth upwards. Harvey also critiques the ideological justifications for neoliberalism, pointing out that the supposed benefits of free markets often fail to materialise in practice. Instead of delivering prosperity and freedom, neoliberalism has entrenched economic disparities and social injustices. Harvey uses several case studies to illustrate the effects of neoliberalism. Chile. The implementation of neoliberal reforms in Chile under Pinochet's dictatorship is one of the earliest examples. With guidance from the Chicago Boys, Chile privatized state-owned enterprises, deregulated industries, and opened up its economy to global markets. While these reforms initially led to economic growth, they also resulted in significant social inequality and labor unrest. China. China's transition to a market economy is another case study. Harvey examines how China adopted neoliberal policies in the late 20th century, leading to rapid economic growth. However, this growth has been accompanied by increased inequality, environmental degradation, and social dislocation. The United States and the UK. Harvey discusses how neoliberalism reshaped these economies, highlighting the deregulation of the financial sector, cuts to social programs, and the weakening of labour unions. The consequences of these policies include the concentration of wealth among the elite, wage stagnation for workers, and the erosion of social safety nets. As we witness growing discontent with neoliberal policies, understanding Harvey's analysis can help us envision alternatives that prioritize social justice, equity, and democratic governance. Understanding neoliberalism as a contemporary ideology dominating the lives of the West, we can identify what and how we can change in our reality to combat its pervasive influence. Harvey suggests that moving beyond neoliberalism requires a reinvigoration of democratic institutions, stronger regulations to curb corporate power, and policies that address inequality and environmental sustainability. Neoliberalism, with its emphasis on deregulation, privatization, and market-driven policies, has profoundly shaped the reality of workers across the globe. While proponents argued that these policies would lead to economic efficiency and growth, the actual impact has often been increased inequality, job insecurity, and diminished social protections. Neoliberal policies have significantly widened the gap between the rich and the poor. David Harvey highlights that in the United States, the share of income going to the top 1% increased from 8% in 1979 to over 15% by 2006. Similarly, in the UK, the wealth disparity has grown dramatically. The income share of the top 1% in the UK increased from 6.5% in 1980 to 13% by 2007. This significant rise indicates that the wealthiest individuals have seen substantial income increases, while wages for the majority have stagnated. The UK has experienced a growing divide, with real wages for many workers remaining flat or even declining, despite overall economic growth. A Brief History of Neoliberalism, David Harvey provides a comprehensive critique of how neoliberalism has reshaped the global economy to the detriment of workers everywhere. The data and examples he provides illustrate a clear pattern. Neoliberal policies have disproportionately benefited the wealthy, while undermining the economic security and well-being of the majority. As we continue to grapple with the consequences of these policies, it becomes increasingly urgent to explore alternatives that prioritize social equity, job security, and robust public services. By understanding the profound impacts of neoliberalism through Harvey's analysis, we can better advocate for a more just and equitable economic system that serves the needs of all people, not just the elite few. Thank you for watching The Left Library. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more simplified insights into political philosophy, political economy, and political science. Let's continue to learn and grow together.